All right, welcome back to Module 7, Creative Real Estate Investing. We are now going to look at Lesson 2, which is talking about conditions. And we're just going to look at some variations or some examples of conditions that are conventionally used in the marketplace. There's far too many versions to be able to cover, but this will give you a general idea of what is out there and what to expect when you're dealing with conventional realtors. So let's take a look at the finance condition first. So let's read this very carefully. This offer is conditional upon the buyer arranging a new first mortgage no later than 5 p.m. on the whatever day of the month, failing which this offer shall be null and void, and the buyer's deposit shall be returned in full without deductions. Well, I don't like this particular clause because quite simply, if the seller wants to hold your feet to the fire, they could say, well, I'll offer you a vendor take back. Now that condition has been met because the seller is providing suitable financing. Or if there was a B lender, if the current rates today are at, the best rates are in the 2.5 to 2.75%, but you could get a loan, and the seller can prove that you can get a loan from a B lender, say at 4%, then you can't use this condition to get out of your deal because the financing could be obtained. So you need to be careful how the clause is actually written. Here's another example. This offer is conditional upon the buyer arranging a new first mortgage with terms and conditions suitable to the buyer in the buyer's sole and absolute discretion no later than. That's good so far because now we've rectified that first issue. See, it's a new first mortgage with terms and conditions suitable to the buyer in the buyer's sole and absolute discretion. So if they can't get it at the interest rate they want and the buyer says, well, I'll give you a vendor take back, the buyer can simply say, no, I don't like the terms and conditions. So no later than 5 p.m. on whatever many business days after acceptance of this offer, and this condition shall be considered fulfilled unless the buyer notifies the seller in writing otherwise. Now, this clause is not a clause that you're going to see very often anymore, quite simply because it's not a well-written clause for the simple reason that if you forget to notify that you were unable to get the financing and the date passes, then you have removed that condition, or you've more or less said that by not notifying them, it has now been satisfied. So you don't want that clause in there either. But these are the types of clauses that are floating around there in the conventional world. Here we have another one. This offer is conditional upon the buyer arranging a new first mortgage a new first mortgage with terms and conditions suitable to the buyer in the buyer's sole and absolute discretion no later than 5 p.m. on the X day of X month, 2006, or whatever the year, failing which this offer shall be null and void and the buyer's deposit shall be returned in full without deductions. This one is much better because, first of all, it is conditional upon the buyer and the buyer's sole and absolute discretion, plus if they fail to satisfy the condition by that specified date, then the deal becomes null and void automatically. I would much rather lose a deal that I wanted to have than to be forced into buying a deal that I didn't want or couldn't afford. So it's the reverse of the clause earlier, so this is a good clause to have. Or one more finance clause, which I like a little bit better. It's the same clause as before, except that it says, in the buyer's sole and absolute discretion, no later than 5 p.m. on the, and it's blank, X number of business days, or days after acceptance of this offer. Now, the reason why I like this is because quite often, especially in commercial deals, a lot of negotiating goes back and forth. You could be a week or 2 weeks negotiating the price back and forth. If you were to put a fixed date in there, let's say that we start off on the 1st of the month and we want 2 weeks for financing, then we're going to say on the 14th day of whatever month. But then we negotiate for a whole week and we don't get an accepted deal until, say, the 8th of the month. And we still have the 14th for financing. Now we've only got 6 or 7 days in order to get financing instead of the 2 weeks, which is what we wanted. Now, a lot of realtors would prefer to have fixed dates because they find that very clear and there's no confusion. However, as you're negotiating, you're going to have to be changing those dates constantly. Every time you make a change in the deal and it goes on for another day or two, then you're going to have to change the financing or any dates for any of your conditions. You're going to have to change as well if you use the fixed date method. If you use the business day method, the business day is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So if you say 5 p.m. on the 10th business day, doesn't matter when you actually get this deal done. It means that you've got 10 full business days in order to get your financing. So this is the way I prefer to do it. That way you're not accidentally leaving yourself short of time for your financing or any other condition as well. So this one I consider to be much better. Then you've got your inspection clause. Now here's a typical inspection clause. Conditional upon the purchaser inspecting the property and finding the property to his entire and complete satisfaction in all respects. The vendor agrees to allow access to the purchaser and or his representatives to carry out such inspections as needed. Now I use the term inspections. You want to make sure that when you are using an inspection clause that your realtor uses the plural, because if you get in there and your building inspector, well, first time you use this building inspector, you don't feel comfortable with the inspection, and or there's certain things that you want to have inspected a little bit more further in closer detail, such as the furnace or the electrical system, then you need to get a licensed technician, electrician in to check out those. If you only ask for one inspection, then by law, that's all they have to give you. If you have a plural, then you can have multiple inspections. And then again, the purchaser shall have until 5 p.m. on the X day of the month, failing which this offer shall be null and void. Again, use business days instead of a specific date. So, the first clause is good. It's okay. It's not the end of the world using the specific dates, but it's just simply better to use business days instead. All right, so then documents. What do you typically ask for? Now, when you're buying a single family house, there's not a whole lot to ask for. You may ask for the electrical bill to see what their bill payments are. You may want to see the gas or the oil, the heating bill. The taxes should be identified when you purchase the property initially, but you may want to see the operating expenses for the house. When you're dealing with the larger multi-unit buildings, there's a lot more information that you're going to want to acquire. So I start off by simply asking for the following information to be delivered within 5 days of acceptance of this offer. Information such as copies of all leases and tenancy agreements for the property. You want a complete rent roll with present names of tenants, their contact information, their current rents, anniversary dates, so that you know if and when you can increase the rents, and any options to renew or any other specific information attached to those leases. Details of all rented equipment and chattels. So, especially in larger apartment buildings, if there's on-site laundry, the laundry facilities could be managed by a third party, and the equipment could be rented or it could be supplied by that third party, and you just share the revenue. So you need to have information of all the details. Do you own all the refrigerators and stoves in each unit, or do the tenants own them? Or does the tenant in unit A and B own their own appliances, but everybody else, you own their appliances? Copies of all contracts and details of any oral agreements affecting the property. So for example, if the tenant in unit B cuts the grass and for that you pay him $50 per cut, you need to know that. List of all operational expenses for the property, including but not limited to property taxes, the heat, the electricity, the water, the property insurance, superintendent's wages, vacancies, management fees for the years. You want 2 previous years, 2 full years prior to your taking over the property. You also want details of last month's rent deposits affecting the property, all environmental reports and surveys for the property, a copy of a valid retrofit certificate, fire retrofit, profit and loss statements for 2005, 2006, because it's one thing for them to provide you a statement for the past 2 years of what the expenses are. But what you want to see is their actual profit and loss statement, the statement that they use for tax filing. Plus any other documents that you may deem to be relevant to that particular property, you have the right to ask for. If they don't have that information, they'll simply stroke it out. And then the purchaser shall have until 5 p.m. on, you can put a specific date, or again, you can use business days tied to the date that you receive the information to approve in writing all of the documents provided in clause, whatever the clause above has been labeled, failing which this offer shall become null and void. Lawyer's approval, a pretty common one as well. Here is a typical one. This offer is conditional upon the approval of the terms hereof by the buyer's solicitor, unless the buyer gives notice in writing delivered to the seller personally or in accordance with any other provisions for the delivery of notice in this agreement of purchase and sale, or any schedule thereto, not later than that this condition is fulfilled, this offer shall be null and void. So again, this is a little bit expanded on what happens if you fail to deliver notice. So every time you have a condition such as lawyer's approval, you want to be in a position where you have to actually fulfill a notice of fulfillment in writing provided to the seller or the seller's agent on or before the deadline that it's due. If that deadline comes and goes, it expires, and they have not received that document, notice of fulfillment, then the deal becomes dead. Again, what you want to do is use business days instead of a specific date. Then the last thing we have is the Schedule A. And here is the top, at the top of a Schedule A, it's virtually a blank document with something similar to what you see here, where it describes the buyer, the seller, the property identification as well, when the deal was entered into, the date, and then quite simply the buyer agrees to pay the balance as follows. Usually you'll get a statement, it's already pre-printed in the Schedule A, but you can put it in yourself. So the purchaser agrees to pay the balance of the purchase price subject to adjustments by bank draft or certified check to the vendor upon completion of this transaction. Most lawyers will not accept cash anymore simply because real estate is a very effective way for criminals to launder money. So they need to be able to prove where the cash is coming from. That's why they prefer to deal with money going through the banks. Then after that one clause, you can have multiple clauses such as the finance, document condition, inspection, lawyer review, and any other clauses and or terms that you wish to include at this point in time. All right, that's it for lesson number 2, dealing with the documents that are typical. Again, any questions, feel free to email me, and or we will talk to you on the live webinar. See you in lesson number 3.